This is Grant Carter, and you're watching Class Act Sports. We're here representing Class Act Sports, and if there was a guy that I knew that was a class act, it was him. He was just, above and beyond in everything he did. The way he practiced, the way he trained in the weight room, the way he, was first to meetings, the way he treated every fan, every little boy and girl that needed an autograph, even after we'd been out in the sun for 3 hours. He was a star already in the league, and yet he arguably was the hardest working guy on the team. So that sent a pretty loud message to me, is to say, this is a league where you take nothing for granted, that every year there's somebody looking to take your job, even if you are, someone of his stature. And so to pay attention to the details and to not, assume anything, because the minute you start to do that, that's when the game can become very cruel and spit you out pretty quick. I was very fortunate because one of the general managers at the time had followed me quite closely when I was playing at Pacific, and so when he created an opportunity for me to come up into the Canadian Football League. Now my story is a little unique in the sense that the team that I went to initially was in the United States, albeit in the Canadian Football League. So back in the mid-90s, the CFL had U.S. expansion for 2 seasons, and there ultimately ended up being 6 franchises in the United States. So the team I went to was in Baltimore. The first year it didn't even have a name. It was the Baltimore CFLers, which then took on the moniker of the Baltimore Stallions in 1995. And so I was out there in 1995 for my first experience in the Canadian Football League, and we were very lucky because that year we ended up winning the Grey Cup. Well, I think the obvious is just scope and scale, right? I mean, the machine that is the NFL, it's the most dominant sports entity in the world without question. They run the league better than anybody. The money is drastically different, no question about it. But I think the Canadian Football League brings a different spirit to it. The franchises and the cities that embrace those franchises, they really are very passionate about that. The history of the CFL goes back and even predates the NFL in terms of longevity. And so I think the fans get a lot closer to the players. The games are different in the sense from a strategic standpoint. It's 3 downs in the CFL versus 4. Fields are a little wider and longer. I would argue that the talent in many cases is the same. However, the body types need to be a little bit different. So it was quite a unique experience, and to have the CFL game dropped into a perennial power market in Baltimore that had such success in the history with the Colts and Johnny Unitas and all these great players. They had been without football for I think 10 years when we came in there. So they really embraced us as a city. We were playing our games in the old Memorial Stadium. We had Johnny Unitas and Tom Matte standing on our sidelines every game. We had the old Colts band out there playing for us and doing the marching things at halftime. So we had a really unique experience, but the CFL is its own brand, and they're very proud of that. Interesting story. The mainstream media was quick to point out that the business economics weren't going to justify it because there just weren't enough markets to continue to expand, and then logistics, it becomes difficult going north and south. The real reason is we won the Grey Cup, and the Canadian faction were not happy about this. I mean, this is their trophy. They don't want to be the NFL. They're very proud of the history of the CFL and the Grey Cup. And so when a bunch of Americans won this, it didn't sit well with them. So the irony of it is the league itself abolished U.S. expansion. And of the 6 franchises that were in the United States, the only one that survived was the one in Baltimore that relocated back to Montreal and reestablished the Montreal Alouette franchise that had been in Montreal for 80 years. It had left about 8 years prior. It was sort of a dormant market, and we reestablished that franchise in 1996, and now they are undeniably the most successful franchise for the last 10 years in the CFL. It was one of those scenarios where my first time in San Diego, I didn't really ever get a true shot to show what I could do, so I made the decision to go. Then I go up to Canada and have a lot of success, so all of a sudden now you become a wanted commodity again. Now you've sort of proven your worth. So I go back to San Diego again in 1997. And unfortunately for me, they sort of put me right back in the situation that I was in before, which was to back up an all-star player. So I kind of realized that, at that point, albeit my goal and dream had always been to be a big success in the NFL, I had sort of created a niche and a real power position up north. So going back in was easy. I felt a lot more confident as a player. I had established myself as a pro, had great success. I felt like I belonged, maybe far more than I did the first go-around. But the politics of the business, are such in many cases, and I know I'm one of, a countless list of guys that probably had the talent to play a long time in the NFL, but for one reason or another didn't ever get that real shot. I sort of see the value on both sides of the argument. From a player's perspective, it's a short career. Whether you get it for 1 year or you have a 10 or 15-year career, it's a very short window. So the argument to say get all you can get while you can is a valid one, and it's a very competitive, violent game. So at any minute it can be over. So I absolutely stand behind that, and I don't begrudge the players for trying to always do what they can do to help themselves. On the other side of the equation, I think the model is a little out of whack. When you have over 60 to 65% of your operating costs going directly to labor, and more importantly, I think in the last 8 to 10 years, you have this front-loading issue where you have guys that are coming out of college, coming into the pros for the first time, highly drafted kids that are being handed 50, 60, $70 million contracts with 40 and 30 and 40 millions of that guaranteed, and they've yet to play it down. And right behind that, you have a guy that's been in the league for 8 to 10 years, a perennial producer. Maybe he's been an all-star a couple times, and he's raising his hand and saying, wait a minute, I'm a proven commodity here. I've earned my right to command the salary, and yet this guy here is sort of out-earning me, and he's yet to prove anything. So it kind of goes both ways. I think this argument is going to be a sticky one, and then we run the real risk of a lockout. We do. But at the end of the day, my personal opinion is, while we might start to tread very closely to training camps and preseasons and all that, as soon as players realize there aren't going to be game checks, and as soon as owners realize that there aren't going to be filled stadiums because we're running the risk of losing games, that tends to be a pretty strong impetus to get guys to come together and make decisions pretty quick. Physics. I mean, you have bigger bodies moving at faster speeds that are the bodies are built in a much stronger fashion. So if you just take the classic, physics equation, of mass, times weight equals speed or whatever it is, I mean, these collisions are happening at such a higher rate of speed, again, with bigger people, and all the players are able to generate so much more power now in everything they do, whether it's in a confined space or certainly when they're, in open space. And so I think it's just a pure function of, the degree of the violence that's going on out there. I don't think that they're compromising the rules any more than they used to. I just think that, if you look back even 25 years ago, guys would lift weights, but they did it half-heartedly. They did it to kind of get in shape. Now, football is a 12-month, 24-hour-a-day gig. I mean, you can't ever get out of shape. And so guys are being able to create, realities for themselves that they can go out and execute, powerful maneuvers at such speeds that we've never seen before. And the human bodies are still human bodies. They're still flesh and bone. So, they're not built to withstand some of these things that are going on. I do some CFL color work. My business that I lead right now is called Gibraltar Sports Capital, and it's actually a specialty finance company for athletes. So, I built this based on leading a finance division for athletes for RBC Financial Group for many years. And what Gibraltar Sports Capital does is it lends and meets the borrowing needs of professional athletes because, banks are in the environment they are, and athletes are very unique in the way that they earn their money because it's seasonal in nature, because their contracts are, sort of at the liberty of free agency and restricted free agency and all these different things. Even well-paid athletes come in and need to have legitimate borrowing needs, and they can't be met by banks just because of the quirkiness of their realities. They don't fit into the classic underwriting boxes of banks. So I bring my expertise as a player and my expertise as leading businesses to that role, and so I'm a sort of custom-focused solution to lend money to athletes for their business needs, their personal needs, and just sort of general things that they have going on in their business lives.